a lot of people have this attitude. I used to have this attitude. So I tweet out this video of a player from the University of Houston, Jamal Shed. He Big 12 player of the year this year with the University of Houston. Well, when he was a sophomore, they lost a 1-point game to Alabama. It was really emotional. Some of his teammates on the way out from the bench kicked over a trash can, broke some chairs or kicked some chairs over. Well, Jamal stopped and picked up the trash with his bare hands. And some yahoo on Twitter was like, why are you praising somebody for doing what they're supposed to do? Well, first of all, Jamal's not supposed to pick up the trash. That's not his job. That's not his job right then, necessarily. And he certainly doesn't need to do it barehanded. But the other point of that is it's always our job to do what we're supposed to do and to do things that make others better or make situations better, which is what Jamal was doing.
You are listening to the Bridging Impact Podcast, transforming leaders on and off the court with host, Coach Furtado. Without further ado, let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Bridging Impact Podcast. We have our second repeat guest. Actually, I believe, Jamie, you are number 6 on the Bridging Impact Podcast guest list. Jamie is the host of Success is a Choice podcast. He's a former college coach and an author, and I'm excited to talk leadership with you today. So welcome to the show.
And Justin, I appreciate you having me back. You ran out of all the good guests, so you had to go recycle some of the oldies. It's like the coaches, sometimes in the NBA or the NFL, you just have to recycle a has-been or somebody that was failed some other time. So I appreciate you having me on or giving me another chance to have a good podcast episode.
There we go. It's like Doc Rivers coming back to the Bucks mid-season.
Oh my. Yeah. How did that work out? Now,
I guess we'll find out.
Now, I am biased, and you don't even know this, but I'm friends with Adrian Griffin, who was the coach that was fired with a 70%, 69% winning percentage midseason. So that didn't quite work out for the Milwaukee Bucks, but I'm also biased, but I got to spend a lot of time with the team and the coaching staff and saw some of the things on the inside. But, I know you didn't have me on to talk about the Milwaukee Bucks, but I will say with that's an interesting situation of, I know we're going to talk a little bit of leadership and I'm probably getting ahead of myself, but when you hire somebody, like they hired Adrian Griffin as a rookie head coach, taking over a team that's a championship contender, you know that you're getting somebody that's still going to have a learning curve. And so when you hire someone or you're that front office or that upper leadership, you've got to say to yourself, all right, what things are we putting in place? This is a guy that has potential, but we're going to have to help him along the way. Or what can we do to get that potential out of him? And I don't think the Milwaukee Bucks did a very good job of that, but that's very similar. You're a coach. A lot of people listening to this are coaches or watching this are coaches. Well, you have players with high potential, let's say, but they drive you crazy sometimes, or they don't always do what you want them to do right now, or they haven't reached their potential. And what a lot of us do is we coach them right now, as opposed to coaching them for what they can be and helping develop them and say, all right, you can be something great. I see this vision for you. A leader is a dealer in hope. Not just cross your fingers and I hope it happens, but a hope in terms of giving people hope and presenting this vision or casting this vision. And I think as leaders, sometimes we don't do that. As coaches, we don't do that. In the Milwaukee Bucks case, I don't think their front office quite did that well enough. But then, coaches, you see that all the time with coaches. They don't do that with their players. They don't have patience with their players, or they don't do anything to help out the players. They say, well, the players are smart enough. They're mature enough. They're adult enough. They know what they're doing. They'll figure it out. Well, everybody still needs help. Even a LeBron James in his upper 30s still needs help. Even a Tom Brady, when he was playing, still needs help. Now, they need help less than a rookie, but they still need help. And that's where leaders forget sometimes. Our job is to make people better and make situations better. And sometimes we don't do that. So yeah, you didn't have me on to talk about that, but that, I just think that's a major issue that we have as leaders. Whatever level that is, whatever level we have as a leader, is we're not constantly looking for ways, left and right, forward, backwards, 360 degrees, how we can make people and situations better. We're kind of just covering our own butt sometimes.
Now that's a great way to start the podcast, and I'll go on the flip side and talk about the Celtics and Brad Stevens. So they hired Joe Mazzulla right last year amidst their coach leaving before because of certain conduct issues. And one of the things that I've heard Brad Stevens talk about with Joe Mazzulla is talking about how Mazzulla's been has been criticized about his late game management, and Brad Stevens has defended him multiple times and talking about like this is his opportunity and opportunity to grow, and those are two different teams, and we'll see how the playoffs kind of shake out because we're recording this in April, right? The finals are in June. But at the end of the day, the Celtics had a great season. It's probably, they have an immense amount of talent, and I'm sure Joe Mazzulla has grown as a coach with Brad Stevens, and I'm sure there's other leaders that are in the building that are believing in him and helping develop him. But I think that's such a great way for us to start the podcast.
Well, you make a great point there, Justin, and that's it's a very similar apples to apples type comparison. Even though, Joe Mazzulla, he was the assistant, right? At Boston prior to taking over, but still, here's a guy who hasn't been an NBA head coach but has all this potential. Well, Adrian Griffin with the Milwaukee Bucks was kind of criticized for a number of different things, but like in game, at the end of games, just like you mentioned with Joe Mazzulla, things like that. You can teach that stuff. Like you can grow as a coach in those areas. But if you're somebody that has no relationship abilities with people, or you're somebody that doesn't get along with people, or you're just, not very talented when it comes to people or seeing the big picture, well, it doesn't matter how smart you are at the end of the games, you're going to lose your team. And so I love the part with Brad Stevens of saying, essentially saying, this is the right guy. We have the right guy in place. Now we're going to work and tweak on these other things because we can work and tweak on these things. It's really hard to take someone who's not the right guy, who's a bad guy, or who just doesn't have it, but they might have all this knowledge of this playbook, but they're just not going to have it. And so I think, Brad Stevens, I think the world of Brad Stevens. I think he's a great leader. I think he's somebody that's shown that at every level he's been at. He is able to relate. He's able to understand people. He listens. He uses his brain, and he's very wise. I'm not sure every leader or every front office is like that. And so I love the fact that they're being patient with Joe Mazzulla. Sometimes people aren't patient. Now, if you think that this isn't the guy, that's one thing. Then you need to get rid of someone as soon as possible. But make sure if you're going to do that, you are for sure this is not the guy, number one, or number two, you've done all that you humanly could to make sure this isn't the guy, to figure this out. When I was coaching, I remember there were so many players I would just get frustrated with because they weren't doing what I asked them to do, or they weren't doing what they were supposed to do. And oftentimes when I stepped back and looked in the mirror, it was, I really wasn't doing all that I could to empower them, to equip them, to enhance their skills. Maybe, all right, well, they have this skill, but man, they're really lagging behind in this other area and they're killing us out there. Well, did I prop them up? Did I help them be the best that they could be? Did I set them up for success? And oftentimes the answer is no, I didn't. Oftentimes I was like, well, I told you that time. Just like with my middle schooler, my middle school son, Jalen, I'll be like, hey, I told you that. Well, okay, well, he's a middle schooler. He wasn't listening. Or you got to tell him in multiple ways. Yes, should he listen? Should he be paying attention? Should he know what I'm talking about? Sometimes, yes. Just like our players should know what we're saying, but the reality is they don't. And so I'll give you, we're kind of going off now on a slight tangent, but how many times at the end of your practices, Justin, maybe you run for conditioning, or at least you've seen that happen in practices. You'll run some line drills or whatever. Then your guys will come into the huddle, their hands are on their knees and they're dead tired. And then you'll give them 2 or 3 instructions or 2 or 3 announcements. Hey, remember, we got to do this, or remember the bus leaves at this time tomorrow, or remember this or that or this. Well, and then invariably you have somebody that forgets that stuff. And you're like, well, I told you. Well, you might have told them, but you told them in a wrong environment, or you told them only once when they were dead tired or they were mad at you because you had just yelled at them. Maybe you can put up announcements, a piece of paper in the locker room that reminds them of that. Maybe you can send out an email. Maybe you can have your assistant coach go to those 3 kids that are always forgetting stuff, and they can remind those 3 kids. That's not enabling them. That's not giving them a crutch necessarily, but that's just as a coach looking around and saying, you know what, here's my potential pitfalls. Here's my potential problems. What can we do to lift people up and help them before they can go out on their own altogether? And everybody's a little bit different, but sometimes we kind of set people up for failure rather than success.
That's a really interesting point, and I'm kind of thinking, and I want to kind of go back a little bit and talk about the potential aspect of it. You know, there's a lot we can kind of break down, and I think a couple of things that I kind of hear in there is the environment, right? And so what kind of environment are we creating as coaches to help all of our players maximize their potential, right? I have this book right up here, Hidden Potential by Adam Grant, got me fired up this year about helping athletes reach their potential, because every kid has a different potential, whether it's on or off the court. That's why we named it Beyond the Game Basketball. We want to help them prepare for themselves to be successful after the game of basketball. And I bring this up because I have multiple players that come to mind when you're talking about different ways that number one, frustrate me, and number two, I feel like as I'm hearing you talk, I'm maybe failing them. Actually, not maybe, I am failing them because I am not preparing them super well in terms of dealing with some of their, body language or energy. And I'm just curious, from this question, how do you help players specifically with, certain body language and an energy that they bring to the team? Because I'm thinking in one particular player where they have a lot of talent on the court, but they're just not putting it together off the court yet.
Yeah, a lot of times what we do is we either mirror their attitude or their appearance. So if they have bad language or bad body language, or if they are getting frustrated, we start to get frustrated with them, as opposed to staying calm, being the adult in the situation, de-escalating something. Also, too, we forget that we had to learn along the way from somebody. And sometimes we forget what it was like to be 13 or 14 or 19 or 21. And we remember and think that we have a revisionist history. We tend to think that we just could hear something one time and we were the model player or the model athlete or just the most coachable person that anyone would have ever had. And the fact of the matter is, most of us struggled in this area as well. We weren't coachable. Or a phrase I like to use with players, I'll even talk to a player about this, is if I think you're being not coachable, I don't want to say that you're being uncoachable, at least to start with. What I might say is something, I might frame it a little bit differently and say, hey, Justin, I know you want to get better. I know you want to be the best player you can because, last week you told me this, or last year you told me this, but right now you're not being very approachable. I know that you want to be coachable, but right now your body language or your attitude is showing me that you're not approachable. And I don't really want to come and try to help you because you're sending off this vibe or this demeanor that you don't want to listen. And I know that's not the case, but I'm just letting you know I'm having a hard time right now. So is it all right if I say something to you? Is it all right if I try to coach you like you wanted me to do last week, or last year you told me this? Would that be all right? When you kind of frame it different ways, and that's just one way to frame something. If you frame it a different way sometimes with these kids or your athletes, sometimes they might be a little bit more open to listening to you. But even before that, before the framing, you got to step back and say, it's not about me. And as coaches, as leaders, sometimes we make it all about us. And man, if Justin's screwing up, it makes me look bad. Or if Justin's not listening or doing what I told him to do, then it makes me look like I wasn't a good coach. We got to get our ego out of this. It's not about our ego whatsoever. It's about how can I help Justin be the best version of himself so that he can help the team be the best team that we can be. And I just think too many times we get in our own way. We sabotage ourselves. We shoot ourselves in the foot because we make it about us. And I was like that, especially my first head coaching job. My first head coaching job, I was the youngest NCAA head coach in America for women's basketball. And I don't know how many times I said, just do what I tell you to do. They wouldn't have hired me if they didn't think I could do the job. I'm begging them essentially, just listen to me. Well, the problem was it was all about me. It wasn't about what can I do to serve you and help you. And sometimes you'll be like, well, that's kumbaya, or, you're not some preacher, or, hey, you got to tell them what to do because they need to do it. This is competition. But at the end of the day, nobody wants to be told what to do. People want to feel like they belong, that they have ownership in this team or this program or what's going on. They don't want to be told what to do. And so as coaches, we like to tell people what to do because we're the experts. We're the smartest people in the room. But just because I'm the smartest person in the locker room doesn't mean that anyone's going to listen to me in that locker room and go out there and do what I asked them to do. So the very first thing is get that ego out of the way. You got to get that ego out of the way and say, how can I help Justin? And that's going to take a whole lot more time. And, some coaches out there listening to this might be like, this dude, Jamy, he has no clue. What's he talking about? I don't have time to do all this touchy-feely, emotional stuff, kumbaya stuff. I got to teach him zone offense. And it's like, you're right to a degree, but you might get in a game and your zone offense isn't working. And then you'll be like, yeah, that's because I listened to this podcast. And Jamy said, I got to spend more time on leadership or getting to know him or connecting. And we didn't spend time on our plays. And it's like, no, really, your problem probably is a people issue. It's probably an issue of Chris and Jalen don't get along very well, or they get along, but they don't trust coach, or they don't trust that this play will work. It's not that you didn't work on it enough. God knows as coaches, we work on stuff probably too much. It's the people aspect. Are they inspired to go out there and do what you're asking them to do or what their teammates need them to do? And so many times we want to prove how smart we are with our plays. And it's not all about the plays.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think ego coaching shows up most in game, right? It's because you're playing against another team. You have, a lot of times for high school basketball, it's just parents in the stands, maybe a few collection of fans, maybe some of your friends came and watch you play, and, maybe they're not hustling or they don't run the play right. And then again, the ego coach goes, well, that looks like a poor reflection on me, so let me yell at you, not thinking about how can I best help this player either learn the play or make sure that they understand what they did wrong and correct and teach, right? Because coaches are just teachers at the end of the day. So I think that's a really great point. And so I think one of the questions I have is just what are some tangible tips and strategies to create that belonging amongst team players that the athletes will want to be there?
Yeah, a couple of things, but first I'll circle back. You mentioned body language with our athletes sometimes, but as coaches, we have bad body language a lot of times. When you mentioned when we're in a game and we might yell at a kid that screws up, we may not even yell at a kid, but we may drop our shoulders, or we might roll our eyes, or we might just kind of turn our back to them or whatever. Like our body language says we're ashamed of what they just did and we're going to distance ourselves from them. And we do that a lot. How many times have I told you that, I don't want to be associated with what Justin just did on the basketball court. We do that subconsciously sometimes, but sometimes we're aware of it. I'm just mad at Justin or frustrated with Justin. So we need to do a better job. And maybe we need an accountability partner. I know that's a strange word, but maybe our spouse or maybe an assistant coach or somebody needs to snap us out of that. We need to step up and say, listen, I've got to coach Justin up. I've got to lead and inspire Justin. It's not about worrying about the results of what just happened. It's not about me distancing myself. It's all about how can I make him better in this moment? How can I make our team better? And sometimes our body language, our posture, or even what we say, sometimes is counterproductive. It's only about us. It's ego driven. But with that being the case, we need to look at what are the ways, I need to know Justin. I need to know the other players on our team. What makes them tick? What motivates them? That kind of stuff. And a lot of times we don't get to know our athletes because we're so focused on, I got to teach Justin and his teammates the playbook. I've got stuff I need to teach them, when we're not really open to learning about Justin and his teammates. Stephen Covey in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, one of his habits is seek first to understand, then to be understood. As coaches, we're constantly boom, boom, boom. We're the ones. I'm the knowledgeable one. I'm the expert. I got all this stuff to teach you. Well, we're not winning games because of my brain and the X's and O's we have. We're winning games with inspired players who play together. That's how you win games, or even more importantly, that's how you maximize your potential. You have got to have athletes that are inspired to do their best, but also inspired to be great teammates. And we don't do that based upon our knowledge of the playbook or how smart we are about into the game, out of bounds plays or whatever. But yet as coaches, that's what we're constantly focused on. So we have to understand our players a little bit, get to know them, connect with them. Once again, I'm not a kumbaya guy, even though it might sound like it, but I do think we need to connect with our players a little bit more so that we understand where they're coming from, so that we understand them, so we know what buttons to push, so they feel like they trust us. I don't care if you trust them. They're a teenager a lot of times, or a young adult, but you've got to trust that they can do more if you do more. And a lot of times what happens is, as a coach, we say, well, I'll do more when they do more. No, we need to start it. We're the adult. So if we have a disagreement with a player, you know what? Why do you think the 15-year-old is going to be the mature one in the relationship? Well, I'm going to, if he wants coached, he knows where I am. Hey, if he wants extra work, he knows where I'm at. No, he's a teenager. Why do you think a teenager, especially on one breath, you've said that their parents are an idiot. Well, if their parents are idiots and they're a teenager, where do you think they're learning this from? Where do you think that they're going to get that responsibility? Be the adult in the situation, be the one to step up. Well, I'm always stepping up for Justin. Well, okay, great. That's why you got into coaching. You didn't get into coaching to be rich. You got into coaching to make a difference. So make a difference. I'm kind of sounding like I'm on my soapbox and I'm a preacher, but stop being about you as a coach. There are very few of us that got into this profession to get rich. We're in this to make a difference. So let's make a difference.
That makes a lot of sense. And I feel like that it's taking responsibility. And this is actually something that I've really recently, like today and this past week, have been really thinking about, is I set the standard for the energy in the room, right? I'm not going to let the athletes dictate the energy of practice, right? I'm going to make sure that it's positive, it's high level, right? Because I think sometimes as coaches, and especially when I don't know, and this is maybe my segue, is how can I start shifting some of that ownership so it's not just coach bringing that energy, right? It's, inspiring and developing a leader or a couple leaders on the team to bring and set that high standard and energy. Because I know sometimes as a coach, it can burn you out if you feel like you're the only one on the team. But if you don't teach other athletes how to lead and how to bring that energy, then if you can't teach them how to fish, then every single practice it's going to be on you.
Yeah, but you may get burned out. But a lot of times what we do, we take the same approach sometimes that our player does when we say, hey, you need to work hard in practice. And so they work hard in practice for like 3 days. And then they say, well, I'm still not starting. I'm still not getting enough playing time. I worked hard 3 days. And you're like, well, you got to work harder longer than that. Well, sometimes we do the same thing. Well, I brought energy for 2 weeks and nobody caught on. Well, then you need to do it a third week and then a fourth week. Well, I might get burned out. And that's a legitimate thing. Okay, well, you might get burned out. You need to figure out, I know what you're saying, teach them how to fish. How can we spread this out? Well, maybe it starts with your assistant coaches. Maybe it starts with, well, I'm getting burned out. Well, then stop having 2-hour practices. Have a shorter practice, have more fun practices. A lot of times we're like, all right, well, players, the players today, they're not committed. They're not focused. You got to tell them a million times, they don't pay attention. Well, they've got like 7-second attention spans and your practices are boring as heck. Why do you think that they would be focused for 2 hours in a practice? Make it exciting. Cut it down to 1 hour. You don't need to scrimmage for 45 minutes. Then do 5-on-0 for 45 minutes and then shoot free throws for 45 minutes or whatever. I mean, make practice fun, make it exciting, have a point to practice, have a point to the drills, bring your players in on the drills, bring your players in on stuff, ask their opinion, play music, and make it a fun environment. Well, No, I mean, we gotta focus. Well, they're not focusing already. That's the problem. You know, the way a lot of coaches are doing it is not working. And coaches are banging their head against the wall, complaining about kids these days or complaining about their team. Well, it's not working. So let's change up the environment. Let's change something. And a lot of times that starts with us. Let's change up me. Can I be more prepared for practice? Can I make it more exciting? What can I do? And instead of standing over at the side with my assistants for the whole practice, you know what? We're going to constantly be coaching up our kids. I'm going to constantly be going from kid to kid, talking to them, asking them questions, saying, hey, did you see what Justin just did out there? Man, that was awesome. I'm going to find ways to catch my kids being good. That's one of the biggest things. We don't catch our players being good. Just yesterday, I tweeted out, and this is a one-person comment that irritated me, but a lot of people have this attitude. I used to have this attitude. So I tweet out this video of a player from the University of Houston, Jamal Shed. He Big 12 Player of the Year this year with the University of Houston. Well, when he was a sophomore, they lost a 1-point game to Alabama. It was really emotional. Some of his teammates on the way out from the bench kicked over a trash can, broke some chairs or kicked some chairs over. Well, Jamal stopped and picked up the trash with his bare hands. And some yahoo on Twitter was like, why are you praising somebody for doing what they're supposed to do? Well, first of all, Jamal's not supposed to pick up the trash. That's not his job. That's not his job right then necessarily. And he certainly doesn't need to do it barehanded. But the other point of that is it's always our job to do what we're supposed to do and to do things that make others better or make situations better, which is what Jamal was doing. But we don't see that enough. We don't have people doing what they're supposed to do enough. We see a lot of people doing what they're not supposed to do, and then we don't have an example. If we started showing people doing the right thing more often, people would then do the right thing more often because they would see that. I wouldn't feel weird as a 14-year-old in middle school walking down the halls of my school and I see a candy wrapper on the ground. Instead of walking around it, I'd feel more encouraged to pick it up because you know what? Other people do that. I see other people do it. It's not stupid to do that. It's cool to do that. I saw this guy do that, but we don't ever show that. We show the bad things all the time. We have to do a better job of catching people being good. And when I was a young coach, I was like, why am I going to pat Justin on the back for running the floor hard or for blocking out? That's what he's supposed to do. Yeah, but you know what? He doesn't do that all the time because he doesn't get rewarded for that. The same way my job is to do dishes in my household. My job is to not throw socks on the floor, to actually use my dresser, to use my closet. The floor is not an extension of my closet. I'm not supposed to do that. But you know what? When I put things away right and when I do the dishes right and my wife puts her hand on my shoulder and says, great job, honey, that inspires me to do that again and then again and then again. Even though that's what I'm supposed to do, that encouraging word from somebody that I trust, respect, or adore, that's going to encourage me to do it more. So if you want people to block out more, then you need to catch them being good when they block out. You're going to have a 2-hour practice, Justin, or any other coach listening to this. Man, you got 2 hours of catching people being good, inspiring them, getting them encouraged and excited to block out. Man, this is going to be awesome. And I'm going to run the floor hard. And even if I don't get the ball, I'm going to run the floor hard next time too, because coach saw that I was doing what was right. And coach isn't only going to point out when Steph Curry hits the game-winning shot, but he's going to point out when Clay sets a great screen to get Steph open. And then that's going to encourage Clay to set a screen next time as well. And that's going to start encouraging more teammates to do that because coach noticed that. Coach didn't just notice when Steph Curry hit the shot. So I'm kind of going off a little bit on that, but we don't do enough to inspire the people around us. We think they need to be self-motivated. Yeah, that'd be great. But the number of people in this world that are self-motivated are so minuscule. People aren't self-motivated. We need to help them to be inspired. We need to give them reasons to be self-motivated, and we don't do that. And sometimes we have kids that maybe were self-motivated, but we didn't catch them being good, especially our role players. How many of our teams do we have role players? We have role players. We want them to star in their role, be okay with their role. And yet the only people we high five or praise are the people that score 30 points or score all the points. Well, that kid was self-motivated for a few weeks, and then they didn't get rewarded for doing their job because they're supposed to do their job. End of story. Now we have a kid that we say is not self-motivated. He was until we never caught him being good.
Yeah, you got to celebrate when they're doing what they're doing well. And I'm just hearing, some of the coach criticism in the back, and I'm sure you've got this question before. And so I'm just curious how you would respond to this question. Is, a lot of times as coaches, we're preparing our young athletes for life. And I think one thing that I've heard is like, especially about going back to making practices fun. It's like that doesn't prepare them for the real world. The real world is, hard and challenging. And why would we make this experience, not resemble the same thing? So what is your kind of rebuttal to that?
Yeah, my rebuttal would be is there's going to be plenty of times that I'm going to have an opportunity to talk to Justin about adversity and him being resilient. I am not around Justin 24 hours, 7 days a week. And every word that comes out of my mouth to Justin and every action I have to Justin is going to be rainbows and butterflies. It's not always going to be positivity. There's going to be so many opportunities because number one, we're human in general, but number two, Justin's probably a teenager or a young adult. So there's going to be plenty of opportunities to come along that say, hey, you're going to have to overcome this. Hey, this is a challenge you're facing right now. These are some steps, or this is a process. This is a way that you can overcome this. Because yes, when people hear me say what I just said, they might think, all right, well, all this positivity, catch them being good, reward them, blah, blah, blah. I'm not talking like this fake positivity. I'm not talking about, like we've all seen the AAU coach or travel ball coaches, but we've all seen them that really all they are is a cheerleader on the sideline, and it gets old because they're not actually giving any substance to them. Oh, good job, run, good. Oh yeah, good job. It's like, good job for what? There's 5 guys out there. What are you saying good job about? But when I say Justin specifically, Justin, great job running to the rim and getting wide on your post up on that fast break. Boom. Coach saw me do something specific that he's been talking about in practice, and he just called me out for doing it right. The same thing, there's going to be times when you don't do it right. Okay, well, I can be like, hey, Justin, remember a couple plays ago, or remember yesterday in that practice when you did it right and I told you about it and you were excited about it? Okay, well, this time you got to be, you kind of, you didn't get to the rim in time. You didn't run quite as hard as you wanted to. And, Steph was out there with the ball. He was looking to hit you in the post, and you didn't quite run the floor hard. But I know you can run the floor hard because you did it last night, or you did it earlier in the game, or whatever. There's going to be plenty of times where you can catch someone being bad. But when you catch them being bad, it's got to be instructive, not penal. It can't be, all right, well, I'm going to drop the hammer on Justin. No, I'm going to instruct him. I'm going to try to correct him so that he can be better in the future. But oftentimes that correction is going to come in the way of saying, hey, I know you can do this because I've seen you do this. Or, hey, you look like you're a little tired out there. No, coach, I'm not tired. Okay, well, you're kind of dragging up the court, but you told me that you wanted to do X, Y, or Z. What you're doing right now, the way you're going through the motions, you're probably not going to achieve that goal, if you keep going the way that you are. So there's going to be plenty of times in a practice, plenty of times in a day where you can have correction, where you can work to help them get better. So it's not all rainbows and butterflies all the time. I think it's a great question. I think that we actually we are less positive about stuff, and we're more just, always the negative person. As coaches, we have film sessions. The only people that like film sessions are the people that don't play, because they get in an air-conditioned room for like 30 minutes, and that's 30 minutes that they don't have to run and they don't have to get yelled at because they're not on film. Your starters are the people that are playing. There's no good clips mostly that you're showing. It's all negative stuff. So even in film, a lot of times it's corrective. Now we'll say it's corrective. But really it's just us being negative. How about we show them some positive things so it gets in their mind the habits, the mental reps of seeing how they're doing it right. We just tend to dwell too much on the negative as a coach. I think we need to be more positive, but positive with substance. Positive because we believe in this person, or positive because they've showed this, they've demonstrated this in the past. If you're going to show a bad clip of a kid in a game, maybe show a good clip too. Hey, this is what we want it to look like as a reminder. Justin, I just showed you, Justin, you didn't run the floor very well, but to remind you of what it should look like, here's a clip of when you did it right. That kind of stuff. And I do agree. We got to prepare people for quote unquote the real world or things that they'll face. But in sports, we're going to have so many opportunities to prepare them for things.
Right. We're not going to get someone that's 100% perfect all the time. There's always going to be opportunities to be able to teach and correct. And I think that's just what I hear is it's not just about berating the person. It's about being a teacher and correcting the mistake so we can continue to help them, again, reach their potential, which is our job as coaches. And when we're talking about correcting the behavior, I feel like the utmost important to go back to your point earlier about building that relationship and knowing their goals, right? So if we're talking about a certain player that I may have, knowing their goals that they want to play varsity basketball, and right now, technically, club wise, they're on the JV team. Well, is this energy and effort, is this going to get you play time on the varsity basketball team, right? Almost phrasing as a question, because they know the answer, right? All of our athletes, really, they know what their effort is for the most part, and what sometimes, like you're saying, they just need to be inspired and motivated. And so, as we kind of reach the 2-minute mark of our podcast, what are some, consistent ways that we can consistently inspire and motivate our athletes?
Yeah, they got to know that we trust, or that we believe in them, or they've got to trust us. They've got to believe that we don't have an agenda other than to help them be better. Now, with that being said, helping them be better, you're also helping all their teammates. You're trying to help all their teammates be better. So a lot of times you have the playing time issue. Maybe a parent's upset at you for the playing time, or the kid is upset because he's not getting as much playing time as he'd like. Even if that kid improves, hopefully other players on the team are improving as well. So it's not always just everything on an island or in a silo that if I get Justin to get better, Justin will now play more. That's not always the case. So they have to understand that, but they have to trust that when you say that, it's not just some agenda. It's not you being selfish, or it's not you just playing favorites with somebody else necessarily. It's that, hey, I'm being honest with you, but you can trust that I'm going to try to help you be the best version that you can be, so that when you do have the opportunity, we're setting you up for as many opportunities to be successful as possible. Lots of communication with an athlete and their parents. I am a firm believer. I did not believe this early on in my coaching career, but as I went, I 100% believe this. I believe you should be talking to players and their parents about playing time. I believe you should be talking to them about their roles. I believe you should be honest about things, because even if you don't talk about those things, they're going to talk about it. They're going to listen to their friends. They're going to listen to the other parents up in the stands. Just because you don't address something doesn't mean it's not being addressed. Just because you don't know there's a problem doesn't mean that there's not a problem. So when you avoid something, it creates a void, and that void will almost never be filled with what you want it to be filled with. So if I don't talk about Justin's playing time with his parents, in my mind, I'm thinking, well, it's not being addressed, then everything's okay. Well, it's not. It's not okay. They're still going to have a problem with Justin's playing time, whether I talk to them or not. So we might as well talk to them, because then what I can do is that's an extra opportunity for me to learn something about them, maybe ask them some questions, maybe listen to them and understand them more, connect with them more. But it's also another opportunity for me to reaffirm what our values are, how I coach, what my coaching philosophy is, maybe talk to them about, the way Justin has been performing in practice. Maybe it's an opportunity to show again, hey, I want to help Justin out. Justin's parents, is it all right if he comes 15 minutes early to practice, or more than he normally comes, or stays late 15 or 30 minutes later than normal, and we'll work with him after practice or before practice on X, Y, and Z. I think we got to communicate with parents, communicate with kids or our athletes. And we need to be, and it's not just, all right, we did this one time at the start of the year. You got to keep doing it because people forget stuff, or they understand it at one point when it doesn't affect them personally. And then 2 months later, it affects them personally and they've forgotten all about, what you said in that classroom or what you said at that practice one day. So we got to constantly develop and strengthen this relationship with both parents and athletes so that they trust that we are looking out for them. We are trying to help make them better.
And when I'm kind of just thinking about the details of that, is that best, probably, hey, 10 to 15 minutes before practice, you want to talk about, I'll actually, instead of it, if you want to, because we're kind of going to go back to, don't assume that the teenagers are going to come. Be like, I'm going to talk to 1, 2, 3, y'all before this practice, then y'all before that practice, or you guys after. And that way it's that consistent communication, because I'm thinking about this past high school season, and I was the assistant for JV and varsity. So I got to work with a lot of players. And as the head coach, I had a meeting, right, with all my players before the season. And I don't think I did a great job throughout the season, kind of doing what you're talking about, that consistent communication. But of course, dynamics change, right, when players get hurt. And then players come back from injury, right? Which then affects everyone's play time. And, one of the other things I wanted to touch on when I was the assistant JV coach is someone who played really well in their club basketball season, the season before, but they didn't do what this coach valued, and they got less play time and they didn't understand it. And now I'm kind of looking back from our conversation it's important for us to communicate. Like if I was that coach, be like, hey, maybe you're not playing enough defense or you're not doing this. And so it's just that continuous communication.
It's continuous communication, but also keeping your head on a swivel, so to speak, and being very aware, not assuming. So all of those things come into play. We don't communicate, first of all. That's a major problem for all of us, whether it's marriage, business, sports, it doesn't matter. Not communicating is an issue, but assuming can get us in trouble all the time, especially when we say something to the effect of, well, they know what they're supposed to do, or they understand what our culture is. They understand they're not playing because they're not good enough. No, first of all, they may not understand that. Second of all, they might understand it, but they might not agree with you. Or how many times there's players sometimes that are like, oh, well, I know I'm not as good as Justin. I know I shouldn't be playing instead of Justin. But why can't I still get some minutes when we're up by 15 or we're up by 20? Well, why can't I still play with Justin? Especially in basketball, you can maybe play 2 point guards at the same time. Football is a little different if you have 2 quarterbacks. But sometimes it's like they understand they're not as good to a degree, but can't there be something else? I'll give you, and coaches don't think about this. I think, all right, you get up, let's say 20 points at the end of a game, or you clear your bench. Coaches clear their benches, let's say, which, hey, let's give these bench warmers a chance to play or whatever. I'm not against that. But what if we, instead of clearing our whole bench or sitting all 5 of our starters, what if we kept 1 or 2 starters in the game who have been screeners all year? All right, their role is not to take shots, but their role is to set screens, to be a dirty, a blue collar, dirty work type player. And we're going to run some plays for them now. We're going to toss them a bone. We're going to say, hey, thanks for all the hard work you've done. We're going to give you some plays now. That's a coach. If you did that as a coach and you explained what you're doing, because most people are like, well, when you get up, you got to clear the bench or, sit your starters. Well, I'm going to give some people some different roles and reward them for what they're doing. So as a coach, are you thinking about people's feelings to a degree of, do I have my head on a swivel? Am I eyes wide open? Am I considering different things? Am I asking Justin to sacrifice all year long? And then even when it gets scrub time, well, Justin now sits. So Justin never gets to score 20 points or whatever. Well, maybe that's something he'd love to do. Maybe it's not. You got to know your athletes, but little things like not just assuming, I mentioned that, not just assuming that they're going to understand or that they're going to be okay with something, but not burying your head in the sand. We do this all the time. Well, if I act like it's not a problem, then it's not a problem. Some of those kids down at the end of the bench, next to the athletic trainer and the water cooler, we might forget that they're down there, but that doesn't mean that there's not screwing up our culture, screwing up our team, being a bad apple. We need to be talking with them. We need to be finding ways to make them valuable on our team. You win a game, let's say, why can't you talk about the JV players? Talk about your scout team or whatever. Hey guys, this was awesome. I knew we were going to win this game because on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, scout team, remember starters? Remember you guys had to run? You guys had to run because the scout team was wearing you guys out. That prepared you for this game on Friday night when we won. When you, going back to the catch people being good, when you make people feel like they're significant and they're valuable, you're going to then get them a little bit more inspired. Now, that doesn't mean that they're going to be perfect, mature, coachable. They're going to love every decision you make, but it's going to buy you a little extra time. It's going to build up a little bit more trust, that as opposed to how we normally do it as coaches, we only focus on the 3 or 4 players that are scoring or our starters or maybe the top person off the bench. No, every player on our team, every athlete on our team, we've got to find a way to make them feel like they're valuable so they continue to take ownership in what's going on. We've been involved in basketball long enough. There's kids at the end of the bench. We know that when we lose a game, they absolutely do not feel like it was their fault at all. They don't feel bad about it because, I didn't play. Well, not my fault we lost. You want every player on your team to feel somewhat responsible or to feel bad when you lose. And in the same way, you want them to feel ecstatic and responsible when we win, even if they didn't play a single minute, because they're invested. They take ownership in that team. And most of us as coaches, we don't have a culture of ownership, a culture where everyone feels like we win together, we lose together, we overcome challenges together, we celebrate successes together, because we're only focused on 2 or 3 athletes ourselves.
That makes a ton of sense. And I feel like that's a great place to finish off the podcast. And I really appreciate you sharing all your wisdom and I think really recapping it with that point, because that's what it's all about when playing team sports, right? We're not necessarily talking about golf or tennis, but it's about building teams, right? And building people, young men, young women, to be successful in the workforce. Because in most work team environments, if we can get them to understand how to be a great team player, how to be responsible for themselves, how to feel a part of something, they can then go take that ripple effect collegiately and beyond, whether it's sports or not. And so that's the beautiful part of sports. And so, where can the listeners go and find, your books, your podcasts, and connect with you?
Yeah, I appreciate that. My website, jamybechler.com, has all the links to all of our stuff. So if you're on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook, whatever, you can find me there. The only place I'm not on is TikTok. You can find me on all the other platforms, but jamybechler.com is my website. And, whether they check me out, check our stuff out, they need to be checking somebody out. Obviously they're listening to your podcast, so they want to have some personal or professional development. It doesn't matter. You've had so many guests on, everybody's going to have some nuggets of wisdom, some insights. But at the end of the day, it's got to start with us saying, you know what, I'm going to set my ego aside and I'm going to make it about the team. Together, everyone achieves more. You're part of that team. Together, we are all going to do this. Not I'm going to do it and you're going to follow me. It's we're going to do this together. And the more you can do that, the more you're actually going to bang your head against the wall a lot less. So whether you're looking at my stuff, whether you're looking at anyone else's stuff, it doesn't matter. First step is you got to say, you know what, I'm willing to set my ego to the side.
That's perfect. It begins within. So thank you so much for your time today and sharing all your wisdom, Jamy.
Appreciate it, Justin.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Bridging Impact Podcast. We'd love it if you would like, subscribe, leave a comment and a review on whatever platform you're on. It's the best way to help us grow. We appreciate you for doing that. We'll shout you out on social media. I'd also love if you connected with me on social media. Let me know your thoughts. And this is why I do it. I want to share knowledge and wisdom from experienced leaders to people like yourself and myself, so we can have this dialogue and move forward, make an impact on the world. So stay tuned, stay subscribed. Cheers.